I still have 4 minutes, don't I?
Yes, you do. We are just greeting.
Okay, all right then. Okay.
As you
Okay,
come on video, we greet you. Yes. We're just welcoming everyone as they show up. Let me get my own tea. Sis, good to see you.
Raymond is there and Joy is there.
And Gillian, I'm here with Gillian.
Okay, wonderful. Welcome.
Yes. Uncle Freeman.
Oh, how is Phil Walker in his RV?
Joy, good to see you.
Huh. You have abandoned.
The other way around.
Seriously.
The other way around.
I know. I'm waiting for your tithes.
I was just about to say the same thing, Uncle Freeman. Joy is the one that has abandoned.
Yes, thank you.
Radically.
I have a lawyer.
Freeman, the noisy guy. Freeman, the noisy guy. How are you doing?
Grace, Auntie Grace.
Yeah.
Great. Is that Sitoto? Hey, Happy New Year.
Honestly.
Yes, Happy New Year.
Sophia is in the house today.
Yeah, and Dr. Philip.
How are you?
All right. And Dr. Rod St. Hill from Australia has joined us as well.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to join you.
Good. Let's see you.
Oh, and Anthony and Leticia are in their car. Reverend Dr. Williams and Duca, welcome.
Thank you, Mama Renita.
It's been a while since I've seen you too.
The bishop is
and
here.
there's Dr. Wilson.
Our host, our
okay.
Yes. Renita, go ahead.
Yes, our guest has entered. Karen Helder, welcome. Dr. Wilson, welcome. We are going to turn off people's ability to unmute themselves now so that we can make sure that we are concentrating very well on Dr. Wilson. And let me do that very quickly here. There we go. All right, Emmeline, it is 4:01 where I am. So it's up to you. I'll turn it over to you.
You're all welcome to the house. This is DML, Discipling Marketplace Leaders. And today we have the honor of hearing from Dr. Cory Willson, one of the authors of the book we have been studying. Sorry, I haven't drank enough tea this morning. But it's been a great book. It's been blessing us. It's been changing our lives. It's been like, this is it. This is what the Lord has been telling us and we could not articulate. And that is just always so lovely to find. And then getting more understanding of how it's supposed to be done. But he will be telling us all of that. So you're all welcome. We have people here from so many countries. Let me see if I can go through as many of them. Uganda is in a room right now. with, I don't know how many of them, 5 or 6 people, those that I can see on video. Dr. Renita is signing in from Tanzania. I see a guest, Rod Senhill. Renita just said that is from Australia. We are glad to have you, sir. We have Dr. Philippe in the house, our own bishop from Burkina Faso. We have Nigeria in the house. Can you just come on video while I'm calling your name so that we know who is it? You can go back off video. We have Nigeria, Dr. Freeman. Uncle Freeman, you're going to be doctor soon. I keep calling you doctor. We have Joy and Gillian in the house from Cameroon. We have Situto from Ethiopia. We have Apostle William Andukwa from Cameroon as well. We have Stefan from Burkina Faso. We have our missionary, Yvonne Mildred from Ghana. We have Pastor James Kamo from Tanzania. We have Ishmael, our brother from Burkina Faso. He just got married. I keep wondering, I thought you were supposed to take 1 year off when you get married and just be. And he showed up the very next week. We have Auntie Caroline Sudi from Kenya. We have Brother Abraham.
We have Sabrina from Brazil. I don't know if you mentioned her.
Okay, I'm reading according to what is in front of me. I think that's from Nigeria or Ghana. I'm not sure where Brother Abraham from. Pastor Michael Owo from Uganda. Ziritu. Okay, sorry, some of your names I'm just seeing them for the first time. I can't pronounce them, but we have a lot of guests in the house as well. Pastors that we invited, Pastor Anthony, Tanzania. We have Dr. Philip Walker, our own able leader in the house, also signing in from Tanzania, I believe. We have Jesse and Yadi from Nicaragua. We have our Uncle Nate Van
Result.
I should be Dutch. That way I can pronounce this. Okay. We are all glad to have you. We have our Uncle Michael Thompson. We are just blessed to have you all in the house joining us today. And we know that we are going to have a great time. So that is the introduction that I can give for now. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Renita to invite. So let us know, those who are on the line, that we really need to be paying attention to even as we have this discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome to everyone and greetings from Tanzania. I know that my internet, at least it keeps telling me it's not stable, so hopefully we will see how it will last. But this is a book, the book Work and Worship from Dr. Willson. And I messed his last name up, Michael Kamink. It came out just this year, in the beginning of 2021, and it has really been a helpful book for us because for discipling marketplace leaders, at least, we've been very focused on unleashing people from the building to be the church every day of the week. And we're realizing we haven't done as good of a job on equipping pastors to know how to welcome laborers, workers back into the church and to engage our church worship, our time when we are the church gathered in equipping ourselves so that we are connecting that work to our worship for the rest of the week. So this book has been important for us. We're going through it as a DML book club. I think we are moving on to chapter 4 soon. So we take 1 chapter per month and we've all been very much enjoying it. And so Dr. Willson spoke with us when we started in March, and we said, can you speak to a larger group, to pastors and church leaders? And he graciously agreed to do that. I would suggest that everyone, if you go to the upper right-hand corner to view, that you put it on speaker view shortly, although maybe Dr. Willson, you're going to share your screen probably, so that will happen. We have put everybody on mute just so that we aren't disturbing, and we are recording this. Please put any questions or comments that you have in the comments line. And Dr. Willson will be having a couple of breaks where we get a chance to do some interacting with him as well. And so we'll be able to take those comments and questions at that time. So let me open us up with a word of prayer, and then Dr. Willson will turn it over to you. Father, we are so grateful for this day that you've made, and we're grateful that we know you have made it and that we can be glad in it. And Father, we thank you for the opportunity this day to worship you in the work that we do, in all the things that you have given us. And Father, as we now gather to listen and to learn together and to listen to Dr. Willson as he shares, Father, we pray that you open our minds, that you open our hearts to hear from you for what your desire is as it relates to doing our work as an act of worship, and to know how it is that we equip the saints for the work of ministry every week in the work that we do. So we thank you for this opportunity. We pray for the connectivity for those who are trying to connect, Father, that they may be able to hear and join and fellowship together, that we may continue to learn and grow as iron sharpens iron. Father, thank you for this time. We ask that you bless Dr. Willson as he shares, that he may share your heart and your mind as well. In your name we pray. Amen. So let me say welcome to Dr. Willson, and you can share your screen, and we will get going. I think I'm frozen, aren't I?
Yeah, thank you so much, Renita and Pastor Emmeline. I really appreciate this opportunity to engage with you all. And yeah, again, and I realize it's a bigger audience and diverse audience too. A lot of different people, pastors, church leaders, business leaders. And so I've worked with Renita and Pastor Emmeline to try to adapt and try to figure out how to best communicate to you all. And I'm sure you're going to have questions along the way. So I'm not going to talk. I know it's a 2-hour we have for Zoom, but I'm not going to speak the whole time. We'll break up this into probably 3 different talks, and we'll have. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your questions, your feedback, your disagreements, even with what I'm saying. But mostly looking forward to interacting with you all in our time together. When I share my screen, I can't see you all anymore, which is probably my biggest disappointment with Zoom over the last 2 years is like I'm staring at my screen now instead of all your faces. But when we do some question and answer and discussion in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, then I'll be able to see you all again. But if you need to, Pastor Emmeline or Renita, please interrupt me if something goes haywire. So it's a delight to talk to you today. And I want to talk about daily work and the local church. And that's going to be the focus of these 3 talks that I have prepared. But this first one, we're going to talk about daily work and the mission of God. So I want to tell you a story of 2 different Christians, 2 different workers to begin with. Dan is a prayer leader at his church on Sunday mornings, and he views prayer as a ministry gift or a gift of the Spirit that he has. But when I asked him about his daily work as a financial analyst, he says he doesn't pray about his work at all. And yet on Sundays, he leads prayer ministry, and he loves that. Joel is an entrepreneur and small business owner. He grew up as a son of missionaries, and he believes that his work is a part of his living sacrifice to God, as Romans 12 indicates, and he tries hard to pray without ceasing, as Paul urges us. But he struggles to know how his work relates to God's mission in the same way that his parents' work did. So Joel grew up in a church much like mine, and in my church growing up, we had this thing called Missions Sunday about once a year. And on Mission Sunday, what would happen is it would be an opportunity for us to focus on the Great Commission and taking the gospel to all the world. There would often be a map of the world in our church on that Sunday morning, and there would be a pin and some pictures in the different parts of the world where the missionaries that we supported were serving on mission. And this was very important to me. It was also to Joel. the entrepreneur. But like Joel, I began to wonder, how does my daily work, how does his daily work as a business owner relate to God's mission in the world? Does he have a place on this mission map? And so what I want to focus on, I want to actually begin in this talk by asking just two open-ended questions for you to reflect on, and we can maybe hear your answers later, but at least want you to register it, even if you don't respond, but verbally. So I want to ask you this. Do you believe that your daily work is an essential part of your discipleship to Jesus? And the second question I have is, do you believe that your daily work is an integral part of God's mission in the world? So if we were to have a discussion on that, I wonder how you would respond. Well, as by the time the next 20 minutes, I want to hopefully convince you that our answers should be yes to this in light of Scripture. But in order to help convince you of that, there is an obstacle that I need to address. And that obstacle may seem a little odd when I say it at first, but it's actually the Great Commission. It can be an obstacle to this vision, depending on how we interpret the Great Commission in Matthew 28, when Jesus, the risen Jesus, says to his disciples, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So this verse on that Mission Sunday that we'd have was very, very important for really shaping the imagination and our thinking about what is God's mission in the world. And the things that I was taught about this Great Commission is that the clear priorities for mission and discipleship is to go and preach to all nations, to baptize, and to make disciples. But it was the going and the preaching that was really, really the focus of what the Great Commission was all about in my church. But this raises a question, and I began to wrestle with this, and this is some of what the story of Joel I mentioned earlier really centers on, is Jesus in this Great Commission simply interested or primarily interested in spiritual matters of the soul, or on just simply the saving of humans and concerned about their eternal destiny? Is the Great Commission, is Jesus really focusing in, is his primary purpose spiritual issues of the inward life of our soul and the eternal destiny of humans? Well, to understand the Great Commission and to respond to that question in light of Scripture, we need to understand what the mission of God is. And so what I want to focus on is, and to help you understand, is that the mission of God is essential for how we interpret the Great Commission. And the second big idea I want you to come away with from this first talk is that our daily work is an integral part of God's work. So as we look at Matthew 28, if we look at one particular line that in my church was often overlooked, and that is this, and it comes at the very end of Jesus's commission. He says, "Teach them to obey everything I have commanded you." Well, if we understand that, that could be a key for us to look back. Oh, okay, what else did Jesus teach them to obey? And if we look back just even a couple of chapters to Matthew 22, we began to see that in response to an expert in the law who questions Jesus about what were the two greatest, or what is the greatest commandment, Jesus says, "Love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul." And then the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I'm sure none of you would want to pit the Great Commission versus or against the two greatest commandments, right? But the Great Commission must be so we must understand the Great Commission in light of these two great commandments that, and Jesus is pointing us back to Deuteronomy and Leviticus in particular. He's quoting from Deuteronomy 6 and Leviticus 19. So when we go back to Leviticus 19, this is that passage in Scripture where God says to Israel, "Be holy as I am holy." So as we understand what does love of God and neighbor look like, we come into contact with a holy God who calls us to be holy as he is. So holiness is essential to loving God and loving our neighbor. And in Leviticus 19, as you would probably anticipate, there is an emphasis on proper worship of God and a renouncing of pagan religious practices. But Leviticus 19 actually has a lot more to say about how we love our neighbors. And how we go about loving our neighbors involves our daily work in many, many ways. You can't love God or love neighbor well if we fail to apply that or live that out in our daily work. And so I'm not going to read through all of Leviticus 19, but just to point out a few things that Leviticus 19, God, when he says to be holy and to love him and our neighbors, he makes it very concrete. These are embodied actions of holiness and love for God and neighbor. And that has to do with social responsibility to the needy and the unprotected, the orphan, the widow, the refugee, the immigrant. It has to do with our relationships within the community, social relationships. A lot has to do with our work relationship, how we protect those with special needs, upholding justice, proper use of and appropriation of human sexuality. It has to do with how we treat the land, our ecological responsibility, and also to protection of women and for slaves, those without the same amount of power or privilege as those in the majority class. And then also how we go about your economic, commercial practices. All of these things, right? Yes, God cares about true worship, right? To be holy as God is holy means that our worship practices on Sunday must be properly engaged in. But so much of the emphasis of holiness, of love of God and neighbor is placed upon our public life in the world. And so much of that means our daily work. Our daily work is essential to love of God, love of neighbor, and to holiness. So this is not new, though. This is the vision of the entire Old Testament. Beginning even in Genesis 18, God called Abraham and his descendants to be agents of shalom, right? To be a blessing to the world. And how Abraham was to do that, Genesis 18, God says to Abraham, you are to do this. You are to be an agent of shalom in the world by keeping the way of the Lord and teaching your descendants how to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and pursuing justice. So in this ethical vision of what does it mean to be holy, to love God and neighbor, shalom, righteousness, and justice come together. Righteousness has to do with upholding the integrity, the right orderedness, the relationship particularly between people and the created order. And then justice, as you know, is making sure that those without the same amount of money or power or prestige also get fair treatment, right? And so shalom, this vision of holiness in the Old Testament, really has to do with God wanting shalom, his justice, his righteousness, his peace to be exhibited between all people and even our relationships with creation. So in the Old Testament, holiness and love for God and neighbor is not solely about an inward piety or purity. It entails living out all of life as an agent of shalom for God. And finally, daily work then is one of the primary arenas where this shalom, love, justice, and holiness is to be manifested. So here's a vision of what that looks like. Shalom in this Old Testament understanding of holiness, justice, and righteousness means that there's integrity between our relationship with God, our relationship with fellow humanity, right? People from every tribe and nation and language, and with the created world. Shalom must extend to all these relationships. God cares about all of these things. His mission in the world is to see that this shalom, the rightly ordered relationships between us and God, between us and our fellow humans and the world, is exhibited. And so that's why the Old Testament, particularly chapters like Leviticus 19, focus so much on our relationships with each other and with the world, and not just simply our worship on Sunday or on the Sabbath towards God. Love of God must include love of neighbor and care for the world. So then the question comes, did Jesus set aside this embodied envision or this embodied emphasis of love and shalom and prioritize an inward spiritual focus? Did Jesus set this aside, or did he change this emphasis from the Old Testament on being agents of shalom and justice in the world? And if not, how do we understand Jesus's ministry in light of this Old Testament mission of God and for his people in the world? Well, in Luke 3, we meet John the Baptist. And it's interesting, if you look at Luke 3, when John the Baptist says, here is how you can prepare for Jesus, this coming Messiah, and that Messiah's kingdom. And he speaks to the crowd first. He says, this is how you can do that. You should share your clothes and your food with those who are in need. And then he talks to the tax collectors. They ask him, what do we need to do to prepare for this Messiah, for this kingdom? And he talks about their work. Don't cheat people by collecting more than you're supposed to, and to do your work with justice and with integrity. And then soldiers, right? And so this would have been Roman soldiers, those who were oppressing, that part of the occupying military force, oppressing the Jews. John says, here's how you can prepare for this Messiah. Don't use your power and privilege at work to extort people or to accuse them falsely. So John says, he picks up on this Old Testament vision of justice, righteousness, and shalom, and he brings it down. He continues to focus on this in his ministry and teaching of how to prepare for Jesus, right? How to prepare people to follow and be a part of Jesus's kingdom. Well, then Jesus himself, in the very next chapter, when he begins his ministry, he opens up the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue, and he reads from chapter 61 of Isaiah. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to declare the year of the Lord's favor. So that to me sounds a lot like Leviticus 19, right? Holiness, justice, love for God is exhibited in our love for neighbor, right? Well, where did Jesus get this understanding? What we see is, he's quoting Isaiah 61, and Isaiah is the prophet who says that Israel is to be a light to the nations, right? There's an identity and a mission that God has given to Abraham and his descendants to bless the nations. And so Isaiah 61 picks up on God's call of Abraham to bless the nations. And so Jesus picks up this vision. How do you be a blessing to the nations? You pursue justice and righteousness and shalom for others, that the love of God, the justice of God, the shalom of God would flow through God's people out into the world. And so Jesus bases his ministry on this very earthy, embodied expression of love, of justice and righteousness. And Jesus makes it concrete, just like John the Baptist did. So if you look ahead to Luke 19, you see that Zacchaeus, right, a tax collector, he had a meal with Jesus. Jesus goes to his house and shares a meal with him. And that meal with Jesus did not cause Zacchaeus to abandon his daily work. You see that it actually led him to redeem how he went about engaging in that work, right? He had a meal with Jesus, and then he began to pursue justice and righteousness and shalom, to be an agent or an artisan of shalom in his daily work. So the Great Commission must be interpreted in light of this larger mission of God to bring shalom and justice into the world. So when Jesus says, in the Great Commission, teach them, those who you disciple, to obey everything I've commanded you, must be understood in light of Jesus here. There's continuity. Jesus says, I did not come to destroy the law of the prophets, but to fulfill them. Right? And so what you see in Jesus and his commission to his disciples was for them to be an artisan of this shalom in their daily life and in their work. To be a follower of Jesus is not simply to try to strive for inward holiness and personal piety. Those are important. But we are to figure out how to live this out, how to be an agent or an artisan of shalom in our daily life and in our daily work. So I'll give you one example of this. Don Flo owns a series of a number of car dealerships in North Carolina. And several years ago, he did a study of who his customer base was. And what he found out was very saddening and disappointing to him, very sobering. What he found out was those customers who had the most financial means to pay for his cars ended up, on average, paying the least amount. And those customers without much financial means ended up paying the most for his cars. And particularly, it was single mothers who, on average, paid the most for his cars. And this saddened Don Flo. It sobered him. So as a business owner, he's like, I gotta have a different model. I don't want to be exploiting the poor and padding the pockets of the rich. And so he came up with this fixed price sales option that he would, yes, they would make a profit on the car, but there wouldn't be a lot of haggling or bartering back and forth at the car lot, because that was a place where particularly those without as much financial or just knowledge of cars would end up getting a bad deal. And so he went to his staff and he presented this model to them, this approach to sales. And you can imagine that many of his salespeople were not happy with this because their commissions, their pay would be impacted. But Don said to his employees, and they weren't all Christians, but he said, I'm a Christian and I'm doing this because God has called me to love him by loving others and pursuing justice for them. But I hope that you would want to be a part of this as well, because you care about working at a place that exhibits justice in our society. And so what they found was that many of his salespeople signed on for this. And over time, yes, their profit per car margin went down, but their sales increased immensely because people in the community trusted the car dealerships. They knew if they sent someone to that car dealership, they wouldn't be taken advantage of. And so Don, I would say this Don, this who owns these car dealerships, is being an agent of shalom, right? He is understanding his work as part of God's mission in the world. And that means he needs to set aside the standards of the auto industry and come up with some other creative way of making a profit that isn't exploiting the poor. So Don is a great example of what it looks like to pursue his work as a part of God's mission in the world. So my question for you is this: what if our mission map didn't simply look like this, but instead it looked like this? Yes, we should care about, supporting particular people to go to unreached people without the gospel, right? That's important. But also God's mission includes the daily work of Christians and wherever God has placed them, whether it's in the medical field, in any of the trades, whether it's in law, whether it's in science, whether it's in business. All of us have a place in God's mission map of the world. So I want to pause here and just ask, this is where I'm going to exit out, but I want to ask you and have a discussion on this. Does this mission map, this revised mission map, reflect your view of the importance of daily work in God's mission?
Hi, Dr. Willson. Can you share the map with us on screen?
On screen. Oh, you haven't seen anything that I've shown? Okay. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. You think I've never done this before. I feel so bad. I had so many slides. And maybe a lot of what I said. So this was the original mission map from my church. And this is a revised. So it's not just pictures of missionaries serving overseas, bringing the gospel to those who have never heard, but it also includes the vocations of all Christians, that all of us have a place in God's mission in the world. I am so sorry, you all. I had, maybe a lot of what I said didn't make sense because I didn't have the slides. So any questions or comments on what we've talked about so far? None from you all? I'm going to see.
I'm seeing chats coming up.
Okay.
Able to unmute. Yes, you can unmute. Feel free to unmute and share. And yes, the slides will be shared with everyone.
Yes, I will share them. I'll send them right now.
Good morning. This is Nate Vanderselt. Excellent presentation thus far. You earlier asked the question, did Jesus set aside that part from the Old Testament and then pick it back up in Luke 3, or was that an extension of what was already back in Leviticus and Isaiah 61? My quick reflection, even as you've accented, is the answer is it was not set aside, but there was a promise then, tracks to run on, and a fulfillment that we are now to live out. And that is brought forth. There's a theological shift and a really important piece in that reality. Can you unpack that a little bit more in terms of why that is such a struggle for so many to think through that? Because it feels like that's a major shift in terms of how we approach this.
Yeah, no, it is. I agree with what you said up front, that is, it doesn't need to be, but that's often how it's interpreted, right? So I think that, what I was trying to do is to say that, and I'm going to pick back up on this in the next talk, but that God's mission in the world, Jesus inherits from Israel an identity and a mission. And so he picks up on the purposes of what it means to be God's people, to be a blessing to the nations through pursuing justice and righteousness that Israel failed to do. Jesus picks up on that identity and mission. Yes, there is newness for sure. There's continuity and discontinuity. But in particular, what's happened from in the Western church, particularly in the evangelical tradition that I'm a part of, is that we've really struggled with the embodied part. We focus so much on the internal virtues and purity, and we've downplayed the embodied emphasis of what it means to be holy, to pursue justice and righteousness. It's more in terms of, like I said, with the Great Commission being interpreted largely as taking the gospel to unreached people so they can be saved and go to heaven when they die. And there's nothing, it's not horrible, but it leaves out a lot of emphasis in Jesus's teaching. And so, that's what I was trying to lay out there, to try to put us in a broader base that really, even if all you look is the the Gospel of Matthew itself, what you begin to see is that interpretation of the Great Commission, which is about inward, reaching the gospel, taking the gospel to the unreached, those who've never heard, can't stand on its own. That inward spiritual emphasis, even within Matthew, just the only book of the Bible you had was Matthew, that wouldn't work. So are there more that you're thinking of though, Nate, that there's a lot we could talk about. Are there other strands you want to?
No, I would defer to other questions right now. You can maybe pick that up on later. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Nate.
Yes, we have a hand up from Professionals for Christ and a question: how do you run a church gathered to equip the church scattered? And I would say go read the book. Wait, let Dr. Willson answer that.
Yeah, and that's where we're going. I should have given you a roadmap. The part 2 talk is going to be focused on daily work in the local church. And then the third talk is going to be on daily work and Sunday worship. So hopefully hold that question. I'm not going to answer, but I hope to give some practical guidelines, or at least a starting point for answering that question. But you're anticipating where we're going for sure.
Emily, my hands is.
Oh, go ahead.
Pastor Derek, in Ghana, he may need to write his question.
Yeah, I really read a bit about William Cory in India, and it looks like yes, I wanted to talk about where there was a missing link. Looks like William was able to stand this, and so the Indians, the gospel that people will go to heaven, but he had impacts in science, he had impact in biology, in all aspects. How come this not continue? And it looks like most of the Puritan also understood this principle, but I don't know where along the line where there was a gap.
Yes, I think I got most of that question. It was cutting out a little bit on my end, but where is the gap that in this understanding of this Old Testament vision of shalom and justice embodied in our daily work, and the mission or the church efforts of the recent years? I think that's your question. Yeah, that's another great, that's a very involved answer. Yeah, where to begin on that?
1970s.
Yeah, there are so many ways. I didn't prepare to respond to that today, but goodness, where to begin? Well, I think I guess so. How do I say this in an abbreviated form? I think a lot has to do with we have to put it within each tradition. That'd be one thing. And so because I come out of the evangelical tradition and have made my way into the Reformed tradition, and I'm still an evangelical, within the evangelical tradition in the 19th and 20th century, there was, I guess what I would say in the West, the Enlightenment has impacted and infected our thinking in a lot of ways, and drawing a sharp line between the spiritual and the material, between what we can see and what we can't see. And there's a lot of philosophical, you could look at Immanuel Kant, for example. He would be one of these philosophical minds that kind of at least gave the paradigm or the framework, the worldview that then became popular, where we draw a sharp line between what we can see and what we can't see. And then those things that we can't see, Kant said that it's not that they aren't real, but we can't know anything about them because we we can't use the scientific method to understand them. So what happened is those things that are unseen, those things that are spiritual, are relegated to the realm of faith and religion. Those things we can see, then science is king over that realm. And so what you had is, it goes back to Descartes and Kant, but there's this dualism that was created in the Enlightenment that separated the physical from the spiritual. And that has been taken on board within the church. And particularly within my tradition, the evangelical tradition, we have not done a lot to repair that until, I guess, recent years. There's more. The Lausanne movement, the Lausanne Covenant, addresses this very, very directly and powerfully. But yeah, your question about the history, that I'm going to set that one to the side for now, but just that's a very important question that all of us with our different traditions need to explore and to interrogate. But thank you. Yeah, great question.
Okay, I see Fanny's hand up, and I also see Renita's comments that please write your questions and we'll read them so that we can avoid bad connections. So I'm going to give a few minutes to Fanny to speak. I hope your connection is good. If it's not good, just write it down. Thank you. So you're on mute. Fanny, okay.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I just want to pick on the shalom, and then whilst you were talking, my mind was just going round on to the business people we work with. I mean, the marketplace ministers. And when we talk about marketplace ministers, and then when we think about the shalom of God, in our context, I just think about trainings, business development trainings we've had for those in hospitality industry, those in care ministry. An example is someone who owns a hospital and then has the privilege of caring for those who would pay for, and then every now and then also get in people or get people coming through who kind of sometimes real or unreal, have no relatives, have nobody to show up to even pay for the bills, you know. And then the situation where you let one go, it becomes the order of the day, you know. So one way or the other, they are not able to pick the real people who really desperately need to be shown that love your neighbor as yourself, and then those who really are just coming to fake to get healthcare services and just pretend as if they have nobody to show up, or they don't even have the money to pay. I mean, that is one thing that my mind hovered about. And then we also have, when you gave the example of the car dealer, the man who has the car dealership in North Carolina, I also thought, wow, that was really a great deal for him to even notice those who were paying more than those who really had to pay what they needed to pay, rather paying less. And I just thought that for marketplace, all that we are doing, work as worship and everything, has to do with marketplace leaders. Then I just got the encouragement from what you said, that it is really important that we continue, and then we really establish the funds for the business development trainings we do for business entrepreneurs from all sectors, so that they are able to really know the business they are handling. Because this car dealership person was able to know his business, probably asked for some data, probably looked very well into the data as a business, as a marketplace leader himself, had the love of God within him, knew God for himself, and then was able to pick out those who were really paying more, the vulnerable paying more. That is the single parents, single moms, you know. So that was an encouragement I picked, that we continue to do what we are doing, making sure that business people, and for ourselves as business people, be able to know the inside out of our businesses, so that we are able to do the good, bring the shalom we need to bring. That is making sure that we are able to kind of do what God expects of us to do. So, and not to exploit anyone. So that is really, and also an encouragement to even know the terrains we work as marketplace leaders, and be able to charge what we need to charge, and make the good profit God expects of us, and make the good overheads God expects of us, and then be able to know where when the charges are high, it will also do good and replenish for others. Yeah. So that's what I thought I should share.
Yeah.
But then there's another bit of worldview, which we teach, and then which is really rampant in the economy we find ourselves, that people go to work, maybe vendors of food by the roadside, but there is a worldview that the first people who come to buy food must be given free. You know, sometimes we may not really, such people may not really understand the shalom of God, but they may be doing some kind of shalom before they start allowing people to buy. They may give off a few, first 5 or so. And so many things are also, shalom is also practiced in many ways that we cannot put a name to, a tag to, but as you delivered, I was able to kind of think through and connect a few dots here and there. Thanks.
Thank you, Fanny. I don't know if you have time for more questions, Dr. Willson, or do you want to go on?
Well, how about, I don't want to lose those questions. Make sure you put them in the chat, but let's do the part 2, because I think some of the questions, some of the will be addressed in that, or at least give us more to add on to that. So we won't lose them if you put them in the chat. Does that sound all right?
That sounds good.
Okay, now please interrupt me if you don't see my slides. I feel so.
No, and I wasn't sure if you had shared. I thought I'll just wait for the first break. So anyways,
okay.
Go ahead.
So I did put the slides in the chat. If anyone wants, you should be able to get the file out of the chat. Otherwise, I sent them to you, Renita and Pastor Emmeline, so that you can share them with the group. But I will share it with my screen right now.
Yep, we're seeing it now.
Okay. All right, so part 2. Thank you so much. Great questions, feedback. Man, yeah. I wish I had more time. We just keep talking about all this stuff, but let's keep going. So I want to tell you a story now. This is part 2. This is daily work and the local church. And so I want to read to you a story of 2 nurses and 2 pastors. Imagine, if you will, 2 nurses, 1 male, 1 female, and 2 pastors, 1 male and 1 female. The first nurse comes to her pastor and shares stories of the highs and lows from her past year of work at the local hospital. She talks about her struggles with anxiety regarding her joys and accomplishments, healing, blessing. She asks some typical about illness, disability, and death. She shares some laments about the healthcare system. The first pastor responds by making a valiant attempt to answer her many difficult theological questions. He falters a bit because he's never really worked in healthcare. Running out of things to say, he gives the nurse a book on faith and work and looks up another on theology and healthcare. Finally, he lets her know that he will be leading a book club on faith and work in the spring. Perhaps she could invite her fellow nurses to come and hear him teach. The second nurse goes to his pastor and offers the same reflections. He receives a different response from his pastor. Hearing him out, the second pastor makes no attempt to teach him about faith, work, or healthcare. This pastor offers no theological answers about death or disability. Instead, she listens and asks probing questions about his work and his workplace joys and heartbreaks. In closing, the pastor asks if she could come and meet with him and the other nurses from their congregation for lunch at the hospital. Sitting around a small table later that week at the hospital cafeteria, the pastor asks the nurses even more questions about their work. She wants to hear more about their victories and failures with their patients. She wants to hear more about their prayers for their colleagues and doctors, their challenges and frustrations of work on their specific floors. The pastor takes notes. She commends them, prays for them, and closes by inviting them to worship on Sunday morning rather than to a class. But on that Sunday morning, during worship, the pastor asks the nurses to come forward to the front of the congregation, of the sanctuary. She asks the elders to lay their hands on them and to pray, not a generic prayer, but one that she has composed specifically for the nurses and those in healthcare. The prayer articulates the nurses' vocational struggles, their longings and praises and pains to God. All those things they shared in the hospital cafeteria. The prayer asks for the Holy Spirit's protection and power to go with the nurses as they return to the hospital the next day. Following the prayer, the congregation stands together and commissions the nurses. The pastor sends the nurses out with a blessing and a charge for their ministry to their patients. So in this talk, I want to begin by asking you kind of another rhetorical two questions. Is the daily work of Christians central to the mission of your local church? And is the daily work of the congregants an integral part to your church's approach to discipleship formation? So again, reflect on your answers on those. How would you answer those two questions? Henry Kramer, who's an old missionary theologian in the middle of the 20th century, he said that the laity and their daily work are at the frontier or the outpost of God's mission in the world. Because he says it is in their daily work that they display Christ's relevance to the whole range of human life. So this is basically what Kramer is talking about here is the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers. And so he has this very full picture of God's mission in the world and the daily work of Christians as an integral part of that mission in the world. So what I want to reinforce in this talk is that the priesthood of all believers, it should be central, not peripheral, to the local church's identity and mission. I know that's a big ask, and so the pastors in the room, I'm not targeting you, but I really do believe this. Every Christian is a priest, every workplace is a parish, and the pastor should be a servant to this priesthood of all believers. These are the main things what I want to reinforce in this talk. Oscar Romero, a great Catholic priest from Latin America who was assassinated back in the 70s, said this. He said, "How beautiful will be the day when all the baptized understand their work, their job is a priestly work. Each metal worker, each professional, each doctor with the scalpel, the market woman at her stand is performing a priestly office." What in the world did Oscar Romero mean by that? We're going to look at scripture, biblical theology of this priesthood of all believers and of the workplace as our parish. So when we look at the priesthood of all believers, a very important doctrine within the Protestant church when we protested and rebelled against the Catholic Church, 1 Peter 2 is where we really get the main thrust of this, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. So you may know this verse from 1 Peter 2, where Peter, speaking to exiles scattered throughout the Roman Empire, says, how are you trying to guide them? How should they live faithfully in the places where God has placed them? He wants to remind them of their identity and mission as a priesthood, as God's priesthood. He says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness and into his wonderful light. But what I want to argue is that this idea from Peter is not new. In fact, it's a recovery of the priestly identity and mission of God's people from Exodus 19. What Peter is doing is extending this now, this priestly calling that is made possible through Jesus to not just Jews, but Gentile followers of Jesus as well. So Exodus 19, what does that say? Well, when Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt, he made a covenant with them. And a part of this covenant, he said to Israel, although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites, is what God tells Moses. So this, God, pulls Israel out of Egypt and gives them an identity and a mission to be his priests, to be a holy nation, a priestly people in the world. But Exodus 19 is not entirely new either. Actually, if we look at scripture, it's a recovery of the priestly identity and mission that God gave to humanity back in Genesis 1 and 2. So Genesis 1 and 2, I won't read through the whole thing, but when God created man and woman in his image, he said, be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. To fill the earth and subdue it, this is be fruitful, multiply, that is what we call the procreation, have babies. That's the procreation mandate, fill the earth. But to fill and subdue it, that's what we call the cultural mandate. And so humanity is part of how they reflect or image God in the world. It's not just by procreation, but actually cultivating culture, making things out of the world, right? They do that through their daily work. And then God says, Genesis says, God put the man in the garden to work it and to take care of it, right? So here you have Genesis 1 and 2, God forming humanity to be a priestly people, or represented to reflect God out into the world, and his care for the world. And he also gives them a particular, not just a mission, but a particular parish or context where this is to take place, and that is the garden. So Adam and Eve were to participate in God's mission by reflecting his image as priests and kings, or priestly kings. The primary way that they did this was through their work in the garden, which was their parish. So in Genesis 2, one theologian says it this way, a biblical scholar. He says that humanity was created to be priests and royals. He says the writer of Genesis 2 was portraying Adam and Eve against the later portrait of Israel's priests who served and guarded God's first temple. So when it in Genesis 2, it says God put man there to take it, to tend in the garden, to take care of it. Those are the same Hebrew verbs that describe the priest's activity later in the Torah or in the Pentateuch. So through their work of gardening and cultivating, that's how they were to exhibit this priestly act. So if this is so, then the manual labor of gardening itself would be a priestly activity, since it would be maintaining the upkeep and order of the sanctuary. So in Genesis 1 and 2, Moses is portraying Adam and Eve as the first priest. To be a human is to be a priest, to image God through how they go about cultivating the world, cultivating creation through their daily work. That's how they are to image God in the world as his priests, or to display his God's royal rule in the world. So priests, what I want to point out of this is that Adam and Eve were priestly royal. So to be human is to be a priest and a royal image bearer of God. The garden was the first parish, the particular place where God had placed them to live out this priestly calling and mission in the world. So in cultivating the earth, Adam and Eve's work and worship were one and the same. There was no separate act. Their daily work of gardening, of cultivating, that work was itself worship. Work is an expression of worship. So Eden was the first parish. The garden was a specific place Adam and Eve were given. And so as priests, they were to participate in God's mission by infusing shalom, justice, righteousness into culture through their daily work. And this continued on even after the fall, right? So when Israel was pulled out of Egypt, a parish that wasn't their own, a place that they were imprisoned and enslaved, God brought them into a new place, a new parish. And so that is why in Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy, there's so many instructions about how Israel was to perform their work to establish justice in society through economic principles and justice and other ways. It's very embodied. These are instructions for how they can be a priestly people in Canaan, because Canaan was their parish. But even in exile, Babylon is their parish. And so the prophet Jeremiah gives them instructions on how to seek the peace, the shalom, and prosperity of the city to which they've been carried in exile. Because the prosperity of Babylon was an integral part to them being prospering. So it says, pray to the Lord for Babylon, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So even in exile, this priestly people is given a parish, a place, a particular place or context for them to live out their identity and mission as God's priestly people. And yes, in Jesus, things do change. But what has happened is, yes, the whole world can now be our parish. But what we often gets missed in this is that it's particular places. The entire world can't be my parish. It could be a person's parish, Christians and different, but it says that Jesus says to his disciples, the risen Jesus says to his disciples, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. So place matters, right? Christians in Jerusalem is their parish. For Christians in Judea is their parish. For Christians in Samaria, and on and on and on. Every place of creation is a potential place for a parish. But wherever God has placed you in the world, that is your parish. That is the place for you to live out your priestly identity and mission. So to bring this home, why work needs to come into our view is that it is in the diverse parishes of us as a priesthood of all believers that we are to reflect the reign of God, the love of Christ, and the reality of the Spirit's power to the whole range of human life. So as some of you were pointing out, what does that look like? What does it look like to reflect the love of Christ, the reign of God, the power of the Spirit in the hospital, in the marketplace, in the school, right? That is your parish. And as a priest, a priestly people, you need to gather with other people who are in the same, who work in the same arena, the same industry. What does it look like for us? How do we struggle with the challenges like Don Flo, the car dealer, right? How do we deal with and confront the injustices that are a part of our industry, a part of our society? And how do we creatively be an agent of shalom that runs against that injustice? So Pastor Artie, he's here in Grand Rapids. He's a pastor at a local church, at Tabernacle Church. And he has organized, he believes that the mission of his local church, Tabernacle Church, the primary arena of mission for his local church is the workplace of the congregants in his church. And so he organizes his ministry, his discipleship approaches around what does it look like then to empower these Christians to live out their priestly identity and mission in the parish workplace where God has placed them. And we can explore more a little about what that looks like. It's all right. So one of the things that I began to do, I'm not sure what this red line is going on here. Do you guys see a red line on the screen?
Yes, sometimes other participants draw a line. We don't know. We are figuring out how to remove them.
Yeah, it's weird. Okay, well, that red line is not supposed to be there. So one of the things I do when I work with local churches to help them re-envision what is the mission of your church, your particular church. And so one of the things we'll do is we'll put up a map of the area. So here in West Michigan, we'll put up a map of West Michigan. Somewhere in the sanctuary, and then invite people to come and place a pin. This is the place where I live. This is another pin where I work or where I spend a significant amount of time. If you're retired, perhaps it's a place where you volunteer. If you are a parent who is primarily taking care of your children, then maybe it's the Little League, the soccer, baseball field, the football field, where you're interacting with people outside the church. Come and place a pin on this map for where you work, where you live, or where you spend a significant amount of time. And when everyone in the congregation does that, then you can step back and then you can see, oh my goodness, this is where Tabernacle Church is on mission here in our particular city or county. It can go a long ways to help reimagine what is the mission of the local church. The daily work of Christians is they are at the frontier of not only the mission of God, but the expression of that mission of the local church in their daily work. So discipleship. One of the ways that you can begin to engage in cultivating a kingdom imagination for this priesthood of all believers is by asking a few questions. Where do you long for God's redeeming power to break into your parish workplace, right? So maybe you gather a table full of people in the medical field, or people in the tech industry, or people who are in one of the various trades, or who work in the market. Selling, food in the marketplace. Where do you long for God's redeeming power to break into your workplace? Where do you desire for God's shalom to be cultivated in lasting ways? And then finally, what anxieties or hardship is weighing you down or those around you? Then what we begin to do is often we'll invite them to pray forward the gospel. How might the gospel transform those areas of brokenness and bring God's shalom? And so one woman who did this was a social worker working with foster parents and foster children. And so she engaged in this. She thought about her work and where is the brokenness, where does she long for God's shalom to be exhibited and felt in the lives of people in her workplace. She wrote this prayer. It is, I desire for people to seek to fully understand and love one another, for foster parents to lay aside their judgments and to enter into the stories of the children's parents that they are caring for. I desire for their care not be limited to the child, but to the whole family who is broken, beaten, and defeated. I desire for birth parents to be freed from their bondage to addiction, prostitution, and domestic violence. For children's memories and bodies to be cleared of the violence and abuse they have both seen and witnessed. For 3-year-olds to play carefree and not know the name of her mom's favorite vodka, or to have memories of her dad choking their mom, or living on the streets, not knowing where their next meal would come from. So when you're talking, when we're trying as a church, not only to imagine what is the mission of the local church, but how may we disciple people to live into this priestly mission in their daily work. Going through a prayer activity like this is very, very helpful. Leading people through can be very, very helpful to them. And so this is one way in which, if I'm a pastor, I'm not going to know more about the healthcare industry than those nurses and doctors and technicians who work there. As a pastor, I'm probably not going to know more about economics than the economists, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But if you see your role not as being the knowledge expert, but as being a servant to this priesthood of all believers, you can come alongside them, asking these kind of reflected questions for them to reflect on how is God's redeeming power needed in their workplace. Where do they long for God's shalom to be cultivated, and to imagine how might the gospel, the power of the gospel, transform these places of brokenness and injustice into places of shalom. Then you're beginning to lead them into cultivating a praying imagination of what God's shalom will look like in their particular workplaces. So my reflective question now for us is this: are the daily parishes, the neighborhood, workplace, etc., wherever those parishes may be for you, central or peripheral to the mission of your local church? And the second question is, what can you do to help change that if it's not? So
I think if you stop your screen share, that red line will disappear. And then if you reshare again, it should be gone. Yeah.
Okay.
So could you repeat the question? I'll type it in the.
Yeah, I'll just put it right in there.
There it is. Never mind.
Yeah. Thanks, Renita. You're awesome. Thank you. Thanks for being my coach this today. Yeah, so I'd love to hear from you if you want to unmute or type a question. I think that's what Renita had asked, if you want to type your questions.
We have a number of questions that are not this one we are answering right now, but I think you answered one of them and then left it again unanswered. One of the questions earlier was, we have people that are being ministered to in the churches or in the workplace. And I think Jamilo asks, is it compulsory that they gather people together as, let me just read it. Is it compulsory we must gather people as we do mission work in the marketplace? Because currently I have people who are missionaries in the marketplace reaching out and people suggesting we should start a church. And I know you also mentioned when you were teaching now, that was a question I'm making a comment now, that the people within the different fields, they need to come together, but how do they come together without breaking the church, the established church already? Do they need to go start a different church? Or is there a way to gather together within the church? I know DML answers this, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
Well, and this is part of the thing, and you know, Pastor Emmeline and Renita, you'll have probably way more experience in answering this than me, but one of the reasons why churches often pop up in the workplace is because the local church has not given any room, does not value what much the energy from the local church is. I want to find ways to recruit congregants to come to the church and run our ministries. So we're trying to recruit volunteers to come to the location at the sanctuary where most people they don't live around there, don't spend much time there. And so, and there's nothing wrong with the church having an outreach to the poor, the homeless, you know, whatever it may be. I'm not against that. But that's the pastor in the church still has primarily the focus of, oh, this is the primary way in which our church is on mission through the organized ministries off of the church property. And what has happened is it downplayed the value and importance of the priests, you know, of the congregants in their, you know, priestly work in their workplace. So I think, yeah, I think that there's a lot here for more, say, ecumenical work, right? So let's say in my church, there's not very many. I'm in the healthcare industry, for example. I'm not, but pretend I was. Not, maybe I don't have anybody else in my church who's in the healthcare industry. Well, I'm going to want to gather with other Christians, Catholic, Pentecostal, Reformed, Methodist. If they're in the healthcare industry and they're Christian, I'm going to probably have a lot to learn from, and I need their fellowship. It doesn't mean it has to be in opposition to the local church. So my question would be, if there's pressure for those who are gathering in the marketplace to start a church there, what will be the relationship with one of the or several of the local churches? I'm not opposed to doing a church plant in a factory. But I think long term, what you need to have, if there's going to be true unity, there has to be some relationship with the churches in the area. And what has happened is that the local churches, I think a lot, Renita and Emmeline, you can explain if I'm saying this wrong, but what happens a lot of times, people in the marketplace just feel like they're not valued. And so I need fellowship, so I'm going to start a kind of a fellowship group at work. And if the pastor that I read, the second pastor I read up front, if that pastor were to embrace those those workers, I think it'll be a different story, right? So I hope that could do something to stimulate the imagination on that.
Yeah, I know it raised up a question. We're doing chapter 3 and talking about the church and our concept of the church gathered and the church scattered and where to meet. I think DML is also wrestling with that, and I'll let Renita and Dr. Phil speak on that. I have divergent views. But Renita is saying that if you're raising your hand, please write your question so that we can pick them up and move from there. And I know Uncle Nate asked a question as well. He said, well, not asked a question, but made a comment. That's an interesting question that's worth asking in every small group, Christian faith group, and even church should ask. What does our missional shalom map look like? And I like the way you mapped out those little pins. I think every person on this, we've gone up to 50, 51, coming down to 48 now. We keep going back. But everyone on this Zoom meeting should have a map of their city, the map of the environment that you're working in, and have those pins there so that we know what is the mission that is right around us before the mission for those that we are sending out. So, but that's an interesting question that we should take away with us to our churches. I'm going to give just one person to speak for this session. I see Sabrina from Brazil with her hand up and no question. So I'll let her ask the question or comment, and then we'll give it back to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, there is a dog here. It's complicated to speak, but I just want to thank you. And okay, now it became really complicated. I just want to thank you and to say that's really surprised me how it works all around the world. All the time that we are talking about, we see that's a very complex subject. Because I'm from Brazil, we see that I work with, I'm a geologist and I work in a tent making organization as a volunteer. And what we see is that when we are talking about tent making, many people are coming just to learn about theology of work and to use this in Brazil, because they are not receiving this knowledge from the church, the local church. And so this is very complex. I mean, with different backgrounds in different places around the world. So I guess this is something that needs to begin in discipleship since the beginning, showing all the people that we are all priests. And I really enjoy this moment to learn more about the subject. So thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Sabrina.
We have another comment again from Uncle Nate. He says, a great discussion. Focus on the local church. Very important, but most local churches spend very little time in prayer, discovery, and discussion on how to work together to see. Now, where was I? To see local places, spaces, marketplaces included, be transformed through his shalom. Imagine what could take place if every pastor spent just 1 hour per week in this expanded way. And there's a question that I think goes in line with this from Ghana. Pastor Derrick says, how do we get Christians to think of being priests in the marketplace now and still think also of eternity? And I think Pastor Rod also asked the same question when he said, I understand it, but how do I get the people in the pew to understand that they are ministers in the marketplace? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so on that eternity piece, let's hold in mind, remember that vision I put of shalom, of relationship. Oh, I didn't, let me do this real quick. Share screen. Let me go back, and I think I can explain this really briefly. This was the one you didn't get to see on my first talk. So when I talked about shalom, it has to do with in the biblical understanding of shalom. It is all encompassing. God cares not just about restoring our relationship with him, but also about how we live out our life with others in society. And that is everything from work and economics to healthcare to justice. Everything is to uphold justice and righteousness for our neighbors, particularly those without as much power or who are oppressed. And also shalom includes how we engage ecology or the actual physical world. Sin came in and distorted all these relationships, right? So sin came in, and instead of obeying God, walking with God in the cool of the day in the garden, Adam and Eve rebelled from God. And then instead of us, treating each other with dignity, Adam and Eve began to blame each other, right? And then Cain kills Abel. And then you have one tribe, warring with another tribe, right? So shalom unraveled in our social relationships. And then even with our relationship to the created world, that now thorns and thistles are growing up, right? And so work has been affected by sin as well. Shalom has been unraveled and disrupted in our relationship with the world. That's why Romans 8 says creation groans, right? So this is God's shalom, right? We would say God's mission in the world is to restore all of these relationships. So, and that's the scope of God's mission. Yes, God cares about the salvation of souls, but he wants us to be with him forever in his new creation, right? But he also wants us, people from every tongue and tribe and nation, beating swords into plowshares, and for the earth to yield its fruits, to not be exploited or poisoned by humanity. Eternity then is what happens in the new creation. When Jesus returns, all of these relationships will be restored again, right? That's what you see in the book of Revelation and then the prophet's vision of the new creation in Isaiah 60. All of these relationships are restored. And so to think about eternity really is to think about this restoration, the full restoration of shalom. So in Jesus, this shalom and all these relationships begins to break in. So God's future is breaking into the present. God's new creation is breaking into the present. And we can tell that because now our relationship, Jesus says, if you know me, you know the Father. Jesus restores our relationship with the Father. Jesus also restores relationships that are broken between ethnic groups and races, between the battle of the sexes. Jesus restores those and heals, brings shalom into those relationships. And Jesus begins to not only speak to the wind and the waves, but also to speak to, when it says all creation groans, longing for the redemption, the revelation of the sons and daughters of God. Jesus allows for the created world to be restored as well. So eternity is really about this full actualization of shalom. So to think about, what is the question again? How do we think about priests in the marketplace now and still think of eternity? What I'm saying is to think about shalom is to think about eternity. I hope that makes sense. There's a whole talk probably just on that, but maybe that gets to that question a little bit. Don't pit the two against each other. right? These are part of the same thing. So, all right. So maybe just looking at the clock, maybe it's okay just to do the third, and then we'll have discussion at the end. Is that okay, Renita? I trust you and Pastor Emmeline, Renita. If you want me just to.
No, sounds good. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. All right, hopefully this third one will be a little bit more brief. This is, all right, you can see my screen okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so daily work and Sunday worship. So I want you to picture these people in your mind. Jose works at a local meat packing plant, which has been in continual operation over the past several months, given the essential nature of food production during COVID. He and his wife are the main providers for their extended family. Yet the working conditions are risky, and the company he works for is not taking proper measures to protect their employees from the virus. Should he quit and lose his job, risking the ability to provide for his family in the long term? And now picture Susan. She works as a hospital administrator. She found out this spring that she had to lay off 200 of her employees as part of the fallout from COVID and the low census in the hospital. Some of these colleagues have worked with her for over 20 years. Sadness compounds the stress as she knows there's so much about the families of these employees who will be laid off. Charles has been laboring on a major project at work, hoping that it will help secure work and keep his business afloat and his fellow employees employed for the next year. At 5 p.m. on Friday, on his way home from work, he got a call from a customer informing him that they were going to accept his bid for their job. On Monday, he will update the entire staff about this great news on their weekly Zoom call. Now I want you to picture all these people show up for church on a Sunday morning. What should they do with these important parts of their work week as they enter the church? What would you want them to do? Now, imagine this. When these people come into worship on Sunday morning, from beginning to end, it is filled with speech mostly directed at them as hearers, as passive recipients. There are no clear opportunities for them to name the praise from their work week or to voice the laments and process the anxiety and losses that they experienced during the week. But I wonder for you, what would you want them to do with these experiences from work? What do you think it would look like to engage in genuine or authentic worship? I want you to reflect on those questions for just a second, and then I'll keep going with my talk. But even for you now, if you reflect, what has made you stressed or anxious or tired this last week? What has made you happy or grateful? Maybe give you a sense of relief. If I were to venture a guess, most of what would made you stressed and anxious and tired or happy, relieved, and grateful somehow relates to your work at some level. Work is a major source of both joy and stress in our lives. And so the question is, what do we do with that when we come to church on Sunday? So why does this matter? So if we really want the mission of the church to focus on the daily work of Christians and for the discipling efforts of the church to focus on the daily work of Christians, then we have to have practices, regular practices that unify the world of work with the liturgy on Sunday or worship on Sunday. Because if we don't, both are Sunday worship and our weekday work will suffer. So what I wish that every church had on their door was a sign like this: please do not leave your work at the door of the sanctuary. Bring it in and offer it to God as worship during worship. So in this third talk, we're going to be focusing on these two questions. Is daily work integral to Sunday worship? And is gathered worship on Sunday integral to our weekday work? And I want to convince you of the answer is yes. Daily work is integral to faithful worship on Sunday because Sunday is the culmination of our week of worship. But at the same time, gathered worship, whatever a day it is, but most people it's on Sunday, is formational for faithful daily work. Those are the big ideas of this talk. So Leslie Newbegin, who is very similar to Henry Kramer, he argues that the pastor's role is to keep the heart of the church pumping well. And this involves two things. The pastor's role is to equip God's people for their various callings in the world. And one half of this work is to gather people together for corporate worship. And the other half is to send them back to their daily tasks, equipped to be salt, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So he visions Sunday worship as a heartbeat that gathers together the blood, right? The people, the priesthood of all believers from their various workplace parishes, and then fuels them, enriches them with the gospel, with fellowship, with the Lord's Supper, with preaching and fellowship, and sends them back out to be salt and light in those daily parishes of their workplace. It's the heartbeat, the gathering and the scattering of God's people for mission in the world. So there's this rhythm of gathering and scattering that is really central to this vision of the church's mission being lived out primarily through the people and their daily work. So if corporate worship is to be formative, our daily work must be brought into the sanctuary. And if Sunday worship is going to be not just an escape from the world, but an enriching experience, then Sunday is the culmination of our week of priestly work and worship in the world. And then the other part of that, as I said, if Sunday worship is to play its proper function of equipping the priesthood of all believers for mission, then worship in the sanctuary must flow out into the world through our workplaces. So you see here is a picture of the front of the church and the altar, the pews, and then the city streets. So this is a direction of people coming in and then going out, bringing in their experiences of offerings from the work week and then being sent back out into the world. In the Old Testament and in the early church, there are four things that I want to say about worship. Worship was creational, vocational, embodied, and communal. Creational, vocational, embodied, and communal. That's what worship was. So one of the ways that we see this is in the first fruit offerings, that daily work is an offering of worship to God. So in Deuteronomy 26, there's instructions for how workers are to take their first fruits, to bring them to the sanctuary, bring them to the priest, and then offer these as an offering of worship to God. So work is the lifting up of our efforts throughout the week as an offering to God, and it's culminated. The culmination, the climax of that is when we gather together for worship as God's people. This is rooted in that first fruits offering that we see in the Old Testament. And as we keep looking in the Old Testament, not just in the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, but also in the prophets, what we begin to see is daily work and this gathered worship are inseparable. So in the prophet Hosea, he argues that bad worship corrupts good work, or unholy worship leads to unholy work. In Hosea, the priests were leading people in idolatrous worship. And this adultery directly impacted the daily work of priests, of the Israelites. So the prophet Hosea says, the more priests there were, the more they sinned against me. These priests were baptizing. Their gathered worship was not to lift up in gratitude to God the gifts of God through their daily work, right? The first fruits. It was actually using those gifts of creation for idolatrous purposes. And this was happening in the sanctuary, and then it led to idolatrous practices in the workplace. The prophet Amos has a different message. It's the opposite. He's going to say bad work corrupts good worship, or unholy work leads to unholy worship. So in Amos, worshipers were going through the motions of worship on Sunday. They were still showing up, but then they were racing out to oppress the workers during the week. And this was corrupting the worship that took place in the sanctuary. So Amos says, Amos quotes the workers saying, when is the Sabbath going to be over so we can go back out and oppress the poor? Through our work, dishonest scales and buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, right? You're treating the poor as just an expendable, disposable commodity, but they're still showing up on to worship on Sunday, right? And so this corrupt work corrupts the worship that takes place when they gather together for worship as God's people. And so both of these, holiness is about wholeness or integrity in the Old Testament. And this involves not only gathered worship, holiness is reflected in right worship of God in the sanctuary, but also right worship of God in the workplace. The early church took over this practice of offering the first fruits, and it was really central for them. And so one of the first, the 3rd century is an early document we have of church order, of liturgies of the early church. We see that it says that whoever has the first fruits of the earth are to bring them to the church, the first of their floors, the first of their presses, the oil, honey, milk, wool, and the first produce of the work of their hands. And so what we see in the early church was that this first fruit offering of the Old Testament was pulled forward into the church, and it was central. Work was essential to the worship of God on Sunday. The workplace was essential to the work. So what would happen is whatever you brought from your workplace into the sanctuary on Sunday was used for the communion meal and the celebratory feast afterwards. Some of it was given to the poor, and some of it was somehow commodified in order to support the ministries of the church. But the point of this, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, is that we are to never come empty-handed into the sanctuary. Instead, and this is really important, yes, we are to come with our hands full of what are the fruits from this week, right? What are the products that we made, or maybe the tithes that have been, monetized that we're going to bring and offer to the Lord in worship. But it's not just the fruits from our work, but it's also the offerings we have from our parish workplaces. That could be the trumpets of praise. What do you need to praise God for that happened during your work week? What do you need to confess? The ashes of confession. What do you need to confess? What sins have you engaged in, or has your company or your industry engaged in that you need to confess to God in worship? What do you need to lament from your work week to God for the pain or the sorrow you've experienced or others have experienced? And what petitions do you have to offer to God during worship on behalf of your workplace? So my wife and I, as we make our way to church, this is before COVID, when everything wasn't online or on Zoom, what we would do is we'd reflect in the car, what from our work week do we have to offer to God in terms of praise, confession, lament, petition, and our fruits of offering? And how might we bring these to God during worship today on Sunday? the early church took vocational discipleship really, really seriously. And so one of the qualifications for engaging in baptism was this vocational audit. So there was a list of prohibited careers. And if you were engaged in these industries, you were not allowed to go through baptism. Now, I'm not saying we need to take this and come up with our own list, but I think it's very informative for us to understand that this vision of an assessment of our daily work, and particularly as it relates to when we gather together on Sunday morning, there needs to be an evaluation, an assessment of our practices through the week, our workplace practices throughout the week. Because full communion with Christ in the sanctuary demands full communion with Christ in the marketplace. That's the story of Zacchaeus, right? But not just of Zacchaeus, but of Jesus's ministry. And so there's this taking this early church, the work of Christians, and to allow it to come underneath the examining light of Scripture, both to bless and but also to lead us into evaluation, like the example that I gave of Don Flo, the car dealer. He's evaluating his industry, his own business that he owns, in light of the standards of God's shalom and justice. So what happens through Jesus, and why this is important, is what happens in Jesus is that Christ, in worship, Christ lifts us up as a worker. Having redeemed and sanctified our work, he offers them to the Father in an act of worship. So in the sanctuary, Christ graciously gathers work and workers from all over the city and offers them up. Those of us who are plumbers, nurses, architects, and teachers, offers them up to the Father as an offering of praise. So it's in Jesus's priesthood that we are made priests. It's in Jesus's work that our work is made into worship. So one woman that I engaged and I interviewed was a speech therapist at a local hospital. And when I asked her about her work, she says she works with stroke victims, and it's very challenging and stressful work, and it's hard, it's painful. And I asked her, what gives you strength to do your work on a daily basis? And without missing a beat, she says the benediction on Sunday mornings. And the benediction at her church said, it goes like this: may Almighty God make us faithful in his calling, joyful in his service, fruitful for his kingdom. May the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be upon us and through us with all those to whom he sends us, now and forever. Amen. So she says, when that benediction is said on Sunday morning, she said, I always have my clients, the faces of my clients in my mind throughout the day. And when they come to my mind, the forefront of my mind, I just say a prayer for God to heal them, to give her wisdom on what kind of treatment plans they need, would be best for them, and that God would bring about restoration. And so she says she has these patients that come to mind throughout her week. And on Sunday morning, at the end of the service, when they say the benediction, she pictures the faces of her patients. And she hears God say to her, go out and serve them on my behalf. That's a powerful connection. No one taught her to do that. That was something she did intuitively. But it informed me of what I should be doing with my work, right? If we leave our work at the door of the church, the work experiences from the week at the door of the church, if we come in empty-handed to the sanctuary, we don't bring the praises, the petitions, the laments, the offerings, the fruits, and our confessions to God, then we're not going to hear from him through the liturgy in the same way that this speech therapist does. Conversely, if a church, if pastors, if church leaders, if worship leaders would think clearly and creatively, how can we invite people to bring the joys and sorrows from their work week into the worship, offer them to God, then they will be formed and energized, equipped to then go back out and to be priests in their daily workplace parishes. That's the vision that we have and why it's important for us. We need to be we need to come to church, we need to gather together so that we can offer these up together, these offerings from our workplace together. But we also need to be fueled and formed through worship to go back out and to have energy and strength and courage to be priests, because it's not easy. So a practice for gathering, this can be individuals, or for those of you who are in church leadership, here are some questions that you can ask yourself or even invite your congregants to reflect on as they prepare to enter the sanctuary on Sunday morning. What praises do I need to bring to voice? What sins do I need to confess? What pains do I need to lament? What petitions do I need to name before God? And what are the first fruit offerings I can lift up to him during worship? So my question for you all is, what do you do with your work experiences on Sunday? Does your church welcome these experiences from your work week, or do they see them as a distraction? Do they encourage you to set them aside? So I'd love to hear from you. How do you approach worship on Sunday in light of your work week?
So I think Sabrina said in the chat that they are told to leave their concerns of the world of outside at the door of the church before they enter.
And Sabrina, what would you want to do instead? And you don't have to give the answer that I just gave, but like intuitively, be honest. What would you want to do with those experiences? You're still muted.
Okay, now I'm allowed to be unmuted. But wow, I was thinking that while you were talking about everything, like that we cannot go empty to the church, yes, it makes a lot of sense. That's somehow I learned to do this, like to forget work. You are out of work, you forget work, but actually it's not possible sometimes to forget. And it can be, even though I'm learning about this subject for the last 3 years, I can say that I still struggle to pray for my work, because sometimes I just feel like the only thing that I need to do in my work is to be light. Okay, I need to be light, yes, but how can I serve through my work as a geologist, for example? Mm-hmm. This is not normally an answer that I get in the church, but I see that the Bible has so much to talk about work. Makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina.
I've turned on the option for you to unmute yourself. So if you want to raise hands again, we only have a few minutes left, but if we want to do that, go ahead. Unless, Emmeline, I don't know if you've noted some comments.
Yes, there was one from Caroline that, what do you do? How do you deal with the clergy that is uncomfortable with the idea that everyone, even the laity, is called? How do you work with pastors, or what would be your advice working with ministers within the fivefold ministries who don't see the calling of every other person? If yeah, I know I could expand on that question, but mm-hmm. Yes, for the sake of time.
Yeah, so how do you work with pastors on this? I think one of them is that, pastors are going to need to be convinced from scripture, most of them, right? But also there is the existential, what does this mean then for my ministries? And how do we go from being a church-centered, upfront, the preacher-focused worship ministry, or organized, the organized ministry of the church-centered, to this, more empowered priesthood of all believers centered? It takes time. But scripture is one of them. One of them is actually, I would just say, begin to interview to actually go, well, this is kind of pre-COVID, but if you could go to the workplace and actually sit down, like that example I gave of the story I gave of that pastor who went to the hospital and it sat in the cafeteria with the nurses and talked with them, got educated about them. That reason why that's important is that as a preacher develops a pastor develops their sermon, they have someone in mind. And if you are not in those places, feeling the anxiety, feeling the pressure, you're going to be disconnected as you're trying to develop a sermon. But I'm convinced that if pastors knew more of what was going on in the lives of the workers, their sermons, their ministries would begin to change. You can't help but, if you're a good preacher, unless you're just very.
We agree with that. I think our problem for us, especially within this setting, is that we've grown up within a tradition that if you were called into ministry, you went for 2 years, 3 years, 7 years of training to become a pastor. And then now we are telling every other person who sits on the pew that they are also ministers. And you're asking us to go back to the church. Mm-hmm. I mean us, because now I'm pastoring a church, but for years, even as a missionary, I would not go to church because I knew that if I went to church, my work outside of the mission world wasn't acknowledged even. So how do we go back to church and submit to our pastors who do not have an understanding of what we do out there in the marketplace, who will refuse us coming in with our ashes, coming in with our tears, coming in even with our trumpets? How do we deal with pastors like that?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, Emma, yeah, this is where, like, I think we should all unmute, particularly you and Renita, and let's have a conversation instead of me trying to answer this. But what I just said about, changing the pastor is very, very difficult. And I think we can talk about that. I think one of the things is exposing them, helping them feel the crisis and the need. Maybe COVID is creating that kind of crisis, hopefully. But will they listen, or are they only focused on trying to figure out which online technology to use to broadcast their message on Sunday, which is, again, a one-way, pastor-focused, worship content-focused, and worshipers are passive recipients, not active participants. But what a note of hope I would say, Pastor Emmeline, is that much of what I'm saying here, regardless if you're a pastor or not, and you have no power to change what happens on Sunday morning, you could still do that. So when I go into church and I have a lot of laments, and then the pastor's just doing happy, happy worship songs, everything's good in the world, I'll just be silent. I'll sit down and pray. You know, God is good. God's in control. Everything's good in the world. That doesn't match up with my work week. I'll, be silent. I'll use that praise song as a source for lament or protest to God. Where are you in this place? I don't sense you here. So that's not me being rebellious to the pastor or the worship leader. It's me being faithful to God. And regardless of what songs the pastor, the worship leader puts together, regardless of whether the pastor values my work or not, I have some agency, some power on control over how I engage and participate in worship. And so songs that are of praise, if you're bringing in lament always is roots off of a truth. Yes, God is good, God is loving, God is powerful, but not everything that happens in the world is the way it's supposed to be or God wants it to be. And when we see the disconnect, the answer in scripture is to protest or to lament to God. Where are you? How long? How long? Maranatha is come, Lord Jesus. That's a cry of the oppressed. Come, Lord Jesus Maranatha is another way of saying how long? Bring your shalom here. So you can begin to do that, particularly if you're conscious of what you're bringing with you emotionally within you to worship. You have agency on how you engage and participate. The questions about how to change the pastor, how to change the churches, we need another, that should just be a whole other 2-hour session. And I don't think I'm qualified to totally answer that. But yeah.
Amen. I think we had some suggestions here as well. I saw Yvonne put up her hand. I don't know if you have a comment, but I also saw what you posted. Invite them along. And that's what this meeting was for us to invite our pastors along, for us to bring in some of these church leaders who need understanding. And please get the book. I think our offices should have some spare copies to sell. It's also on Amazon. You can find this book or everywhere. So find a way to get this book into your pastor's hand. Find a way to start a book club within your own communities with this book. I'll let Renita make comments. I don't know if. Yeah.
Well, and also the book that you've been given, when you're done reading it, pass it on. Don't keep it on your bookshelf. And tell them they need to pass it on to the next person so that we can continue to learn and grow together. Yeah. I don't know if we have time for any more comments. I think
it's time.
All right, Pastor Derek, as long as you're brief, you may go ahead.
Yeah, there is a missionary who told me that just as the Levites were priests between God and Israel, and the whole Israel were priests between the Gentiles and God, so are the pastors are supposed to equip the entire body for the work of ministry, according to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 and 12. So any pastor who understands that the ministry, the work of ministry is mostly in the marketplace, will know his place, that his job is to equip the saints to do that. So I don't see any competition at all.
Amen. That was brief. That was powerful. Maybe you'll run the next one. Next session. Awesome, Pastor Jerry. Thank you.
All right, maybe Jamilu yet, and then we will we'll wrap things up.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that we also request is that there is a need for we to have this institution here, because sometimes there are pastors who don't like to read, but they want to have courses and certificates. And that can create opportunity for people to come to learn. We have given a lot of people books, but they don't read. But when you form an institution, people want to be there. And so I'm really requesting that if we can have this institution of their own, it will make more impact. Because sometimes even trying to integrate them into our theological institutions, it has taken a lot of struggle because of tradition. So I place that request. If God so will through you. Thank you.
Thank you
for that. On that before we talk to Renita, that's one of the things that at ZML we try to do, create these partnerships with the theological institutions within your country. And when we come in, we'll bring textbooks like this as part of the course that they'll go through and get their certificate. So create the partnerships. Yes, we are going to come in on a theological basis, but we'll end up helping to equip even those who are gathering for equipping with this knowledge, if you will let us in, if you will give us that access. So thank you. I thought I should mention that. Dr. Renita, over to you.
Well, no, I just want to thank everyone for being here, for being a part of this. And I just want to affirm that exposure is important. We didn't get where we are overnight, and we're not going to change things overnight. And so what we want to be able to do is to be able to continue to encourage our pastors to experience what we're experiencing, especially for those of us going through DML, and continue to pray, as Dr. Willson has said. Dr. Willson, we are so grateful for you and for your time, for your book, for how you are influencing the way we see the church and the way the opportunity we have to bring our worship, our work into our worship and into the church. So we are so thankful, and I know I've already caused a lot of your sales to increase. So we will hope that will continue. And but we appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. And I'm going to ask, I think I saw Dr. Philippe still on the line. Are you there? Dr. Philippe, would you mind closing us in prayer today?
Okay, I will
From
do that with
Burkina
pleasure.
Faso?
Yeah. Father God, we thank you for this wonderful time we had together around the world to reflect about how we can serve you inside the church and mainly outside the church, being salt and light to their nations. So we want to pray that you'll help us, whatever platform we have, that we really move on and share the conviction from your word, that people's life and the church ministry will change and transform and do exactly what you want it to be done. We thank you for all those leaders and for the contribution today and the experiences, and pray that from now on we'll be better servants of yours in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you all so much.
Amen. Amen.
It's been good to
Amen.
see you. And yeah, we will continue reading. And Emmeline, next chapter is what? Chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
Okay.
Amen.
I'm
All
stopping the
right.
recording.
God bless you all. Have a good day, night.
Bye.
Good
God
night.
Bye.
Great.
Thank you.
James and Tola, long time. Good to see you.